Hello, everyone. Today we have with us John McAlpin. John leads the SEO strategy for Cardinal Digital Marketing, an Atlanta SEO agency that focuses on serving enterprise healthcare companies across the US. Currently located in Dallas, John is deeply engaged in both the local and national community and has a strong background in technical SEO, web development, and digital marketing strategy. John also provides freelance web development services for WordPress hosted sites. John is also a VIP contributor at SEJ. John, welcome to the show and excited to have you.
Hey, I'm just so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I mean, John, I kind of was, doing some research on you and, your journey. But one thing which I wanted to know is how did the interest in SEO happen?
So, I majored in advertising in school and immediately started working for this huge tech company, Active Network, that just moved to Dallas. And so I started as a holistic digital marketer there. So I did a lot of honestly, web development stuff, not just on building websites, but mostly landing pages and email marketing. So communication and, driving conversions were a huge part of my early journey. And then from there, I moved into an in-house healthcare where I was doing everything. So web management, SEO, and then that's where I started getting more into SEO and then, PPC and paid social. And I got my hands on the full suite of digital services. And I really kind of realized that I resonated most with the SEO side. And it just was the most fun, most interesting, seemed to be the most comprehensive, and also the most challenging. And so from there, I went into agency life to really get my hands on a number of different industries.
And you seem to be loving your agency life.
Oh, yeah. Agency life definitely was way more fit to my, honestly, work-life balance. And I love the atmosphere more, and I like the variety.
I understand. Well, I mean, you work with some large clients and, you have worked on large websites. Now, one question which, a lot of SEOs, often ask is how do you crawl large websites? So what is your process for crawling large websites?
So I don't stick to one type of crawler. I use a couple different crawlers, but one of my biggest issues that I run into, especially with large sites, is connecting with their IT teams ahead of time. Nothing's more frustrating when you run a crawl overnight and then their firewalls block you. So you only get 3 to 10% your way through and you just wasted a whole night. So connecting with their teams to make sure they can allow you through. So the other thing is I also create a custom user agent for my computer, which you can do with any crawling tool so that the IT teams also whitelist my IP and my user agent. And then also do it on downtimes and do it overnight and try to set reasonable crawl delays so that you don't honestly take down their site. It doesn't really happen a whole lot, but sometimes, especially with larger agencies, IT teams can set up very sensitive firewalls.
Yeah, I understand. I have come across instances where, we were trying to crawl a website and, we kind of ended up crawling it for almost more than a week. And then, suddenly the crawl stopped. So, there have been, such instances. So I totally understand.
Yeah, it definitely also make sure your computer's set up for it as well.
Yep, absolutely. Any tips, for auditing large websites?
I mean, sometimes it's hard because you want to sometimes you try, okay, do I set up a process? Do I set up a template that I go through? And sometimes when you stick to the template too much, you lose track of some of the bigger issues. And so sometimes what I do is before I even start an audit or while it's running, I'll go look at performance data and look at drops, look at certain pages and see and ask, really ask the client, what are the big things you want me to focus on? Because sometimes you'll realize you'll be looking at just holistic stuff and they'll say, oh, well, this one page used to drive a lot of traffic and then we made some changes and now it's tanked. And you'll find weird things in there that your crawling tools might not pick up. So it could be everyone looks for redirect loops, but what about canonical to redirect chain loops and things like that you may not think to look for, but if you have kind of a hint of where to go, sometimes that's good. So I always talk to the client first and get some ideas of past performance.
Right. Makes sense. Your go-to tools?
Go-to tools. So it depends what we're doing. So my all-in-one SEO suite for general research is SEMrush. It has like it has all-in-one. For multi-location keyword tracking, and I'm talking about not like your local like mid-market. I'm talking about like your enterprise level. So when I have like clients with like hundreds of locations, I like advanced web ranking for the sake of integrating with Data Studio, and it has the best pricing model for and features for tracking multiple locations. For auditing, I like a combination of Screaming Frog and Sitebold. I think OnCrawl and Deep Web are both very good. I'm just not a fan of their pricing model, but they're both very good, very similar. I also just like Chrome DevTools and just looking through things there and seeing how things render.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, Screaming Frog and Sitebold work, like good for, us as well. And especially, when you're trying to crawl large websites.
Oh, yeah. When you get into the millions of pages, I do like the cloud-based crawlers, though.
Right. Well, talking about millions of pages, like everybody knows that, like internal links are like very important. Now, like, what is your strategy, in order to add internal links to like, a website that has millions of pages?
Yeah. So it really comes down to categorical pages. So when you have things like, let's say you have a blog and then you have like it broken out into categories, really structured, and it relates to different sections of the site. So we'll just talk about, I focus on healthcare, so it's easy for me to do examples in healthcare.
Makes sense.
In almost every healthcare site, they have two big sections. They're almost universal. You have the services or treatments that you offer, and then the conditions that you treat. Right. And oftentimes in our resources or blog section, we talk about both of those things. And so on like resources section, you can have related blogs that follow that tag. So those are natural internal links that you can add that are dynamic. When we're talking about things that are more like nuanced and not so universal in sidebar, you want like in content links. I'm a big fan of the tool InLinks by Dixon Jones. Have you used that one before?
No.
So it's relatively new, but it works on semantic SEO. And so you put in all your pages, you assign categories to them based on Google's knowledge graph and their topics. Right. And it automatically inserts links to their JavaScript. They're HTML links, but it's basically a single line of JavaScript you add to your site, and it injects all of the links. And you can review and modify them and also add schema. And I'm sure we'll talk about that tool later, but that's one of my best ones for automating internal link building.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. How do you handle keyword cannibalization in large websites?
So luckily in healthcare, it's a lot easier. When you get into like e-commerce and things like that, it becomes much more challenging. Yeah. But I really try to work on, and it's a little bit of an old school tactic, I guess, but content silos and making sure that things are organized. I also look at, whenever I start a new site, I do a general content audit. And see, which pages are too similar, and do kind of that content pruning technique of trying to merge pages. And I also look at rankings and see which pages frequently show up for the same keywords, and see if we can combine them. Obviously, location pages tend to happen sometimes, but there's only so much you can do there. But really, it's content pruning.
I understand. But, also, I think, like you talked about e-com, and also I think sometimes, like you have like so many content formats, right? I mean, you'll have a blog, you'll have a video, you'll have these guides, I mean, how do you kind of, like allocate content to these different formats, like without cannibalizing each other? Like any strategy you follow there?
Yeah, I mean, so I like multimedia sometimes too, especially when you're mixing in like not just video, but other engagement things like online tools, or like healthcare sites love those symptom checkers and things like that. And certain elements I think you can repurpose as long as it adds value. So even if it's like the same image that's somewhat related, or if it's a video that talks about like what patients can expect in your setting, like what's different, like your About You video, if it's relevant, you can have that like on your About page and your location pages, or some things that you can reuse that I don't think would really consider as cannibalization. But I also like having like dedicated areas as well. So if it's a video library, if it's like resources for patients versus providers, things like that. So really organization is the key there.
I understand. Well, you talked about schemas earlier. How do you work on schemas for big websites? I mean,
Yeah.
like I'm sure you're a fan of automation. Like, what tools would you suggest?
So there's one thing I do with, so I'm fortunate that a lot of my websites are WordPress based. And a lot of them, my higher paying clients do custom sites, and they use something called advanced custom fields. So I'm able to automate location schema. And so I pull in, I'm able to separate out like the various lines that we need for local schema. And I basically automate. So all location pages pull in certain bits of information to make them custom.
Right.
So
right.
That's one of the first things I do, but also semantic SEO is a big one for me. And so that's where inlinks comes into play. And I make sure all of my core pages and a lot of my blogs are marked up for semantic schema.
So basically, like for international websites, right? I mean, like, like when you have to implement hreflang, I mean, what are the prerequisites, or what is the right way of doing it?
So, I mean, the biggest one I always come into is, can we just use a plugin for the translation? And I'm like, sure you can. It's not going to be as obvious as good quality, but when you have the resources to do real translations, I really honestly, it comes down to a spreadsheet and mapping out to make sure that we have one-to-one versions of each one, and then adding in those every variation of an hreflang tag. I even have a blog on my website that shows exactly how to implement them, and I created visualization that shows, every variation that you need for each page, so that sometimes it's easier to understand it with visuals. But honestly, I do spreadsheets to make sure that I can quickly filter to see which pages are missing the hreflang tags, and obviously double check with whatever your crawler is, whether it's Screaming Frog or Sitebulb. But I bring it down to spreadsheets to make sure that I'm covering everything.
I understand. Well, how does one recover from a penalty? I mean, what should be the immediate next steps?
So I'm going to quote one of my friends, Christine Schackinger, who, if you haven't had her on your podcast, she's great too. All she does is penalty recoveries, really. I mean, I'm sure she does other stuff, but that's her specialty. And she gave me one of the best pieces of advice a long time ago, which was over 90% of penalty issues are actually technical related. So if there's not a penalty in Search Console specifically, and it's a client says, I got hit by an algorithm update or something, it's a technical issue. If it's a true penalty, obviously you want to clean it up. But I also set the expectation with a client that once that's cleaned up, don't expect an immediate bounce back, because oftentimes it takes time to recover. If it's a link penalty, it can take quite a bit of time. If it's something like malware injection, like they got hacked or something like that, and they come under like social engineering or one of those type of penalties, those can be a little bit quicker. But when it's a hack-related penalty, take a lot of precautions to do a lot of security audits and make sure that's not going to happen again. And usually the biggest issue comes from plugins, which is unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it's really setting an expectation with clients. The cleaning up is the easy part. It's the recovery is the hard part. And it's a lot of trying to put more good out there. So it's good content. It's trying to, when it's link building related, trying to earn more natural links, maybe slow down on the link acquisition on your, what they call the link velocity. Maybe slow down a little bit.
Right. Makes sense. Would spending time on branded search, make sense for every business?
In a certain amount, like when it comes to like your schema and your organization schema and your about page, you really focus on getting your brand out there. But when it comes to branded search, I like to mix that in with my link building efforts. So not just focus on your your money keywords. Try to mix it up with some of your branded search as well. So I definitely think where it fits the most in SEO is really link building.
Right. No, I agree with you. I mean, like we do a lot of link building ourselves, and I completely agree with you. It definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
The 3 trends that you see in enterprise SEO.
One trend that I've seen actually start disappearing right now is the demand for voice search. And I remember a few years ago, I'd always get on these sales calls and they're like, what are you doing for voice search? And I'm like, what is your desired outcome for voice search? How do you think your patients are going to like make a transaction? Like, how are you going to make money from voice search? And it's always like the crickets.
Yeah.
And recently, that's a trend that I've seen decline, thankfully, because it's people are starting to realize, oh, you can only do so much. Now you can build apps and integrations to like make an appointment, but users just aren't doing that like we thought they were. So that's one trend that I've seen down.
And also, I think, like it also depends, for voice search, in particular, I think it also depends like on the business, right? I mean, somebody wants to see a doctor, or a lawyer, like he would want to do all the research, right? I mean, why would he just, do a voice search and whatever comes up, like he wants to do the research.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like when you have like the home assistants that have the display, it's important to know where they're pulling that information from, because each device pulls from a different source. Like some pull from like Yelp, some pull from Google My Business, and like then you want to focus on your review generation on all of those platforms. And so that's really what it comes down to. It's very little to do with content, because they pull from featured snippets a lot, but I mean, really just focus on your review gen there. Another big trend that I'm seeing is that as e-com is trying to find ways to automate their review gen and trying to make it as easy as possible. And one of my favorite tools, and what they do is pretty cool, is the company Podium.
Yeah.
And so they have this way that they can like scan your phone's like cookies and things like that and automatically sign you in. And I think that's so cool from a user perspective, because like that's one of the big things with mobile, right? Okay, I don't remember my logins. I have to log in on my browser, and they can pull that in and make it easier for users. That's way better response rates.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You just talked about link building as well. Like what does your link building strategy look like, especially for large websites?
So this is actually pretty funny, but especially when you get into niche healthcare or specialty healthcare, we've had a lot of success with forum link building.
Okay.
And that's not specifically to earn links, but it does two things. One, like keyword research only takes you so far. And remember, keyword research is always like a historical thing. But in forums, we're actually seeing what patients are talking about.
Yes.
And we're learning a lot more about the struggles that they're going through, the roadblocks, and the real issues. And so we bring that information back to providers, get answers, try to close that loop, provide content for them, and then continue that conversation in the forums to answer that question. Because a lot of times these forums are showing up in search results, and especially for like the mid funnel level queries where they know they need something, to try and figure it out. And if you can provide that information, that's driving more traffic back to the site and spreading brand awareness.
No, absolutely. I mean, they would definitely, drive in the relevant traffic, but then still, you would still kind of, do the traditional link building, for your like normal authority and, like your normal ranking as well.
Yeah. And so that's something that we've also seen enterprise healthcare really focus on, is a diverse link strategy. Because I'm really interested in forum link building, not as a DA builder or like a link authority builder. It's just for patient research and driving traffic from referral traffic. But I really have seen a huge trend in healthcare organizations invest in link building, because we've built a few case studies where we had a client drop $25,000 a month on link building, just to go ham, do something. And we were able to be so diverse. We do it. So whether it's guest posts, link insertion, providing new resources, a small mix of forums, you try to have that balance of different types of links, different types of anchor text, different pages you're pointing to. And then, there's traffic just skyrocketed. Their rankings went up like crazy for the few months. And when people start seeing those case studies and they start investing and seeing the results, it's that trickle effect. They tell their other friends at other companies. And so the investment in link building is actually increasing, even though I'm seeing a lot of other SEOs say, link building is not as important, but that's never going to be the case.
Right. And I think it's also is, like you need to understand, the client's current link profile. You need to understand, okay, fine, like what is he competing with? It's not always about just increasing the authority, but it's the overall link profile. Okay, fine. Does he just go after guest posts? Does he do a, pillar page, do a skyscraper, get multiple links to that? I think, like if you understand, like those things well, and you do a proper research, of the website and the competition, definitely, you can't just win with on page. You need a proper, genuine link building strategy to actually get those results.
Yep. Content's king, but link building is queen, and we know who calls the shots. So, we need that sense of authority. And I think it's interesting what you said about, the types of links in their current profile, because I'm working with a startup right now in healthcare, and they're going to go public and things like that. So they have all these press releases, and so their link profile, when you look at like what Google thinks is their category, I think they're just in business, at general business. They don't even see healthcare yet, because we're just getting started earning some of those backlinks for that context.
Absolutely. When we look at link building, like we do like a domain comparison where, like we would actually see the exact link profile of the competition as well, because, that kind of gives you an understanding. Okay, fine. Does he need like, like, again, depending on the niche, does he need like .edu? Does he need .org? Or, like what kind of links? And, like you said, like somebody in healthcare, has a lot of PR, but then is not being considered like in healthcare.
Exactly. And speaking of PR, though, one of the strategies that I think have been super effective, especially for newer clients that are just getting started on link building, is the unlinked brand mentions, especially if they're established, because those are usually so easy to acquire, especially as just like, if it's already established, like, oh, no problem. We'll just drop a quick link. It makes sense. It's easy conversation. And those are usually like one of the early strategies we do just to get it out of the way, kind of like the low hanging fruit before we start, while we're like building out the content, the pillar pages and things like that.
I understand. But tell us your favorite client story.
Favorite client story? One probably was, I think the link building one where we just like made this huge case study, and I had this big "I told you so," and then they stopped after a while because they said, "Oh, we're good. We don't need it anymore." And then it just kind of cut off a little bit, and the growth rates just dropped after a while. They kind of just trickled around. So I'm like, no, maybe we shouldn't cut it. So that's kind of a fun one. But I think one of the most interesting cases was when I had a client come to us and they had this chart that looks like they had their traffic, and then it goes up for a bit and then it just drops straight down, goes back up, drops. And they're like, it's got to be an algorithm update. We know it is. Google doesn't like us. It's an algorithm update. And so before I do any crawls, I just look at their performance, see which pages are driving the most traffic. And it was like their main service page that was driving all the traffic. It had that trend. And I noticed that at some point they had switched the URL, and that's when it dropped. And then they switched it back. And so it went from like a .com/service name to a blog. They moved it to like a blog post. And then they moved it back to a service page, and then moved back to a blog post. I'm like, it wasn't an algorithm update. You're just like someone's messing around with the URLs internally. And so I think that was a fun one to show like, hey, this is a quick recovery, and we were able to get a quick boost from that.
Right. Any tips that you would give our audience that they can use and benefit from?
When you're looking at your SEO strategies, take a moment to step back from the weeds and look at where Google's heading, what they're trying to do. There's a lot of distrust with Google and what they say is a ranking factor and when it is a ranking factor, because they'll say one thing, then someone will do something to prove another. And then remember that Google is not perfect, and that they say that their algorithm does one thing, but what I think they're really trying to say is they want their algorithm to do this. So they say that, let's say guest posts are not effective. Maybe they don't want guest posts to be effective, but they still work. And so try to go for where Google's heading towards. So when we talk about, guest posts as a strategy, and like we said before, we're not only doing that. It's a mix. So we're still doing them because they work. They're probably going to work for a while, especially when you do it in a white hat manner. But try to, this is why we talk about diversifying our strategies and seeing where they're headed. So right now we're seeing Google focus a lot on entities and their knowledge graphs. So that's why I'm really focused on semantic search, because even if Google one day says, hey, you know what, we're not focusing on topics anymore, we're going to focus back on keywords or on something else, at least the content we've built still makes sense for users, and always keep your users in mind. So really focus on where Google's heading, not where they are right now.
Right. Well, John, thank you so much for your time. But, before you go, I like playing a quick rapid fire just for fun. Whatever comes to your mind, just, like, don't,
Let's do it.
yeah, just don't lose time and, answering.
Okay, let's do it. I'm ready.
Perfect. Favorite meal of the day?
Breakfast.
Eating out or home food?
Eating out.
Favorite superhero?
Superman.
If a movie was made on you, what genre would it be?
Comedy.
The last book you read?
Oh, Sandman.
Well, John, thank you so much for your time. Like, some really good nuggets you shared with us. I know, like, the viewers will benefit from it. And hopefully, we'll catch you again in some other episode.
I hope to be back. Thank you so much.